What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then I'd really appreciate if you could hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video every time I put one out. And in today's video, it's actually a requested topic. It's on muscle imbalances, and I'd like to thank Noah for the question because I'm pretty sure a lot of people run into this, and personally I have as well. So his question was specifically both the arms. He mentioned that he does have some muscle imbalances in his arms, and he'd like me to address this topic. I'd like to give you my 4 tips on how to properly correct this. And the best part about these tips is that they're not just going to apply to your arms, they're going to apply to any muscle group that might be overdeveloped or underdeveloped. Starting off with tip number 1, and that's to improve your mind-muscle connection with the lacking side or the underdeveloped side. So I got a kind of like a cool little test for you. So if you take the lat pull down, for example, if you're doing a wide grip lat pull down, first what I want you to do is to perform the lat pull down like you normally would. And as you can see here in the video, I'm just doing a normal lat pull down. And then the second, on your second set, instead of doing it like you normally would, I want you to shift your mind-muscle connection to the left side or your left lat and really try to focus on engaging that during the movement. And as you might notice when you're actually doing it, is that your mind actually goes towards the muscle, and you can kind of feel it like you're almost prioritizing it, but the exercise itself is still a lat pull down, and it's still a bilateral movement. So just by shifting your focus, you're able to kind of change the dynamics of the exercise a little bit. Now I want you to perform the third set and try to focus on putting your mind in the right side or the right lat, and see if you still have that mind-muscle connection. So going back to my example is, like, let's say your left side of your lat is the one that's underdeveloped. You can check by doing this test to see whether or not your mind-muscle connection is consistent on both sides. And if you do find that maybe one side is just kind of engaging a little bit more, this is kind of a good way to figure that out, and then you can kind of prioritize it that way. But obviously when you look in the mirror, you're going to figure out which side is kind of imbalanced, and that could, like I mentioned, could be the reason is because the mind-muscle connection. So that'd be the first little thing I would try doing a bilateral exercise and really trying to hone in on that mind-muscle connection. And this is kind of a great way to see whether or not both sides, you're able to kind of connect and activate both sides. The next step that I would give on improving the mind-muscle connection and the underdeveloped part would be to do a pre-activation or a pre-exhaust exercise. I think that a lot of programs that you might see out there, you're starting off with your heavy compound movements, and that's because you're fresh and full of energy. This actually works the opposite way. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be starting off with a pre-activation exercising, meaning something that's kind of warming up, getting the blood flowing. So an example of this would be, let's say you were going in, you were doing the same exercise, the lat pull down, that was your main progressive movement. Instead of starting off with that exercise, what you would do is you'd actually go in and perform something like a single lat pull in, single arm kneeling lat pull in, or you could do a single arm seated row. And you can use this as an activation exercise to really kind of engage the lats from the beginning. And then when you move into an actual compound exercise, when you're engaging multiple muscle groups, you're going to be able to have more blood going towards that muscle. You're going to be able to feel it a lot more. You're going to be able to engage it, and that could actually maybe reduce the chances of one side being more dominant than the other. So that could be one reason to why you have actually imbalances on both sides, and you can actually prioritize that by actually doing pre-activation exercises. So those are the first things that I would do, and I would really make sure that you're addressing the mind-muscle connection, because a lot of times people are going through the motions, and you might be kind of prioritizing one side and not really knowing it. Another example of this would be a bent over row. Maybe you're leaning towards your right side, and you're kind of engaging more your right side than your left side. So I think that by doing a pre-activation exercise, you're able to kind of warm up both lats, and you're able to kind of allow the mind-muscle connection to be established from the beginning. And that actually translates nicely into my second tip, and that's to include unilateral exercises into your training. I think it's very important to include unilateral exercises for any muscle group, whether or not there be imbalances or not, but it's especially true if you do have a muscle imbalance. So in Noah's case with his arms, if you do, let's say it's the biceps, that you kind of have one bicep that's bigger than the other, or more noticeably, maybe even stronger, instead of doing barbell curls, what I would highly recommend is to do unilateral exercises. So you could do a couple examples of this would be to actually do dumbbell curls, because each arm is performing the exercise separately. And personally, I like, if you were to do one side at a time, you always want to make sure that you're starting off with the side that's underdeveloped, so you're focusing all your attention on that, because a lot of times the unilateral exercises, you have to do one side obviously and then the other side. You want to make sure you're fresh and full of energy with that side. So that's why I'd highly recommend that if you're doing dumbbell curls, let's say you're going to start off with this arm and this is the underdeveloped arm, you'd want to make sure to start and do maybe 10 reps on that arm, and then do the other 10 reps on your other arm. That would be another tip that I'd have, or maybe even like a single single arm preacher curl in terms of actually getting the machine variation in. I think that's very important to have unilateral exercises. And another tip that I would give is don't be afraid to kind of increase the volume on that side. I think that if something is really underdeveloped, like personally for me, I actually had like my left lat was underdeveloped compared to my right lat, so I actually made sure to include a lot of single arm rows in there, and I found that over time it really came to be a lot more balanced. And if I didn't take that approach, I don't know what it would look like now, but I think I kind of caught it early, and I was able to make sure that I was including, like I said, unilateral exercises to fix that. But going back to what I mentioned with the volume, a good way to do that is, let's say you're so normally what you'd be doing is you'd be doing 3 or 4 sets. What I would do is I would do 5 sets. I would do 3 sets on the side that's underdeveloped and 2 sets on the other side that's proportionate to the rest of your body or proportionate to the way that you want. So that's kind of adding an extra set. And I think over time, you're going to be having more volume. You're going to be able to kind of put the muscle through a little bit more stimulus. So it's going to be able to kind of prime it for growth a little bit more. And over time, that body part is going to hopefully catch up with the side that's overdeveloped. A lot of people kind of use the differences in weight. So normally if you do have a strength imbalance, you might be rowing 30 on one side and 40 on the other. I think that's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would kind of go more towards actually increasing the sets. I just feel that you'd kind of want to make sure that you're at least upping your volume, whether or not it actually be the weight that you're using or the sets that you're performing. So that's another reason, is to really make sure that you're including unilateral exercises and that you're your workouts aren't dominated by all compound movements, because over time it is definitely going to, if it's a visual imbalance, if you're looking in the mirror and you're seeing it, over time it's going to lead to a strength imbalance, and it's actually going to hold you back from progressing. So yeah, definitely address it and make sure that you are including unilateral exercises in your training. Moving on to my third tip, and that's to really double check to make sure your form's on point. You should always prioritize your form over the weight, and I think that once your reps start getting sloppy, you kind of have an indication of whether or not you're doing too much and your form is kind of you have a breakdown in your form. I think that if you take the example of the seated dumbbell shoulder press, I think that's a really good one. Yes, it is almost like a unilateral exercise because you are doing 2 sides separately, and you will quickly find out whether or not there's a strength imbalance, but there could be a mobility issue. Maybe one shoulder is a little bit more mobile than the other, and over time this is something you definitely need to make sure that you're addressing. So I think that from a standpoint of actually how to address it, I think you should have someone who's experienced take a look at your form, or maybe if you're training with a training partner who kind of knows a little bit more, or kind of has a little bit more experience, it's always great to kind of get their feedback on it, or maybe somebody at the gym that you might know that kind of has a little bit of experience, and maybe you don't have somebody that's there that's able to kind of check it out. I would highly recommend to film yourself, because when you're looking in the mirror and you're looking at your form, it's kind of hard to kind of get that 360 view, kind of like the back view or maybe the side view. So I think that if something's really off and maybe you're like I said, maybe one shoulder is just kind of more imbalanced, or one trap is more imbalanced or overdeveloped than the other. So yeah, if you take like the dumbbell shrugs, maybe one side, if you're doing like a dumbbell shrug, maybe one side's coming up a little bit further than the other, and it's kind of like if you're so used to doing it, you're not going to be able to know. It's just going to feel normal. But when you actually kind of look in the mirror, maybe have somebody else look at it, or even film yourself, you're going to notice that, oh my god, look, one shoulder's coming up a little bit higher than the other, and over time this is definitely, like I said, going to kind of promote that muscle imbalance, and there could also be a strength imbalance there as well. So I think the biggest thing is to kind of really make sure that your form, kind of like relearn the exercise, make sure kind of correct what you're doing, and sometimes this really takes kind of making like the weight a little bit lighter or lighting the load. I think a lot of people are definitely not necessarily scared of that, but people kind of they don't like going backwards, they always like going forward, and I think that makes sense. But for something like an imbalance or something like a strength imbalance, over time it could lead to an injury, so you're better off just kind of going through the exercise again, relearning the exercise, figuring out what's kind of holding you back or where you're breaking down, and really correcting that. And a lot of times the most important thing to do and to deal with that is actually letting the load and have somebody look at you, or kind of assess yourself by filming yourself. So that would be my third tip, is to make sure that your form is really on point. Have somebody who's experienced take a look, or film yourself to double check whether or not there is something going on, and then maybe at a later time you have that video and you can show it to somebody, and then they can kind of give their feedback on it. Yeah, so those are that's my third tip. And my fourth and final tip would be to experiment with different exercise variations. There's just some exercises out there that people have a hard time connecting with. And I think a lot of people always want to go towards which exercises are the most optimal. I don't know how many times I've searched in Google, like the top 10 back exercises or the 5 best leg exercises. But most times, some of those exercises, I just don't connect with them well. So over time, I've slowly developed ways to kind of put different twists, put different variations on the exercise that I'm able to actually feel a little bit better. So if you take the example of the barbell curl, maybe you just don't know that one side's dominating more than the other. If you're always doing that, then you're always going to be promoting that muscle imbalance. And if you're kind of stuck inside that box, then you're never really kind of able to explore different exercises and exercises that you might be able to connect with better. So that's why I think trying out different variations, so doing a dumbbell curl, maybe try out a machine preacher curl, maybe even try out a cable curl. I think that if you try out those variations, you're going to be able to figure out which ones you actually connect with the best, and which ones you actually like, and which ones are actually going to be able to give you the greatest benefit. And I think, like I mentioned before, I think a lot of people get too caught up with which ones are the most optimal versus which ones are actually the ones that you enjoy, which ones you actually feel the best. And I think that those ones are the ones you should prioritize versus doing barbell curls just because they're barbell curls and everybody says you have to do them. So that'd be my fourth and final tip, is to really experiment with different exercise selections and find out which ones actually work best for you and which ones you're able to connect with, because over time you're able to kind of make sure that you're feeling it, you're able to develop that strong mind muscle connection, and it's going to allow you to kind of have less of a chance to kind of develop those imbalances, and you're able to find substitutes and exercises that kind of compensate for them and kind of help bring up those imbalances as well. All right, so there you have it, my top 4 tips on how to properly address and fix your muscle imbalances. So just to summarize, the first tip was to actually kind of establish that mind-muscle connection. Make sure that you have a strong mind-muscle connection by doing pre-activation exercises. I think those are extremely important, especially if you have a hard time connecting with a muscle. The second tip was actually to include unilateral exercises. So instead of doing all bilateral exercises, make sure you include some type of unilateral component and make sure that you're really working both sides evenly. And like I mentioned, maybe even up the volume as well. And my third tip was to actually make sure your form is bang on. I think a lot of times as you kind of progress in weight, your form kind of goes out of whack. So make sure you kind of have somebody check on your form, make sure it's kind of where it should be. And even if you have to film yourself, if you don't have somebody handy and be able to show it to somebody, or kind of assess it yourself by looking at tutorials on how to perform the exercise and figure out whether or not you're doing it correctly, I think that will be beneficial. And then the fourth tip, like I mentioned, is to find substitutes, find exercises that work for you, that don't, maybe it's like something that's going to help promote that muscle imbalance is obviously something you're not going to want to prioritize. So don't be afraid to try out different variations, like unilateral variations, or anything that's going to kind of get you outside of that box. And kind of, if you're always doing the same thing over and over, you're not going to be able to change it. So I think by going out of your means and kind of getting a little bit more creative and putting different variations and twists on things is going to help you in the long run, and do the exercises that you feel the best versus the ones that you feel like you have to do. I think that's the number one thing to take away from that. Like I said, that's going to conclude today's video. I hope those 4 tips help, and definitely give them a try and let me know if they did. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you get notified every time I put a new video. Also turn on the bell notifications, because like I mentioned, YouTube kind of has a funny way of hiding those notifications, and I do want to make sure you guys get notified every time I put a new video out. So be sure to subscribe and also turn on the bell notifications, and drop the video a like. I do appreciate all the support, and the feedback definitely goes a long way, and I'll catch everybody in the next one. All right, peace out.